Okay, you guys, one more time. Chapter 32.4, last section, Transformation of Japan. Pay attention for this one because this is always like the counter as far as it might be a compare and contrast, how European involvement on these areas. This would be the one you want to use as how this one was different. So, two objectives, how Japan was forced to change, and then the changes political, economic, and social that took place in the 1800s. Transformation of Japan. Remember, Japan's kind of this China's little brother, tries to emulate China for the most part, and to most of the extent, it follows the same process in dealing with the European slash Western involvement. Okay, so Japan society in turmoil in the early 19th century. Lots of problems, mainly dealing with the fact that they can't feed their people. Small island, not a lot of production going on, relatively speaking, for all the stuff, and then they have a series of bad harvests, and the government can't control. The Tokugawa shogunate, which is in charge, has lots of issues with people rebelling, small scale, but constantly. So the daimyo, member, which are like kind of like a lord type dude who has control of some parts of the Japan that runs it for the shoguns, are not able to keep the people in check. And this leads to lots of starvation and stuff like this, and then lots of rebellion, small scale rebellion, which is going to come into play later on. The Tokugawa does try to attempt some changes. So we got here listed 1841 to 1843 some minor attempts to do this, but it's not. It doesn't stick and doesn't hold and doesn't change the situation. So they counseled the daimyo to try to limit them and try to um, control what they were doing in the extent that they might be a threat to the shogunate. Same thing with putting the samurais into debt so much so that they would be able to control them. They abolished the merchant guilds; those are groups that were kind of pushing for change and trying to press them. And then they compelled the peasants to return to cultivating rights. In other words, you will work in the fields, almost kind of like serfs in a sense, in that they were stuck on the field and had very little mobility within society. The reforms overall, as stated, very ineffective because they just had tons of crises on top of each other, and then bad ecological times. In other words, the droughts and poor harvests that they were facing. This opens them up to a convenient time. The Europeans get involved. So the Europeans were limited to the Dutch trading in the port of Nanjing. No, that's China. I can't think of the port. Nagasaki, thank you. But now this is going to spread. Other groups are trying to press them, in particular the Americans. They have we're killing shamu and stuff like that. So we have whaling spots that we want to stop off, and we want to stop in Japan because it'd be convenient to restock and then get back to America afterwards. Well, they keep on saying no, no because they're trying to get rid of the foreign devils. They don't want the European influence coming into Japan. This is all good and fine until all of a sudden this guy named Matthew Perry, who's an American admiral, I think he's an admiral, might be Commodore. It's Commodore Perry. Anyways, he's a Navy dude. He shows up in Japan and he says, "Hey, please open up and start doing trade with us." Japan says, "No, we don't deal with foreigners. We don't like you guys. Stay away." And then he points the gun at one of the palaces there in Tokyo and Edo, and supposedly could be true, could not be true. Blows one up right next to the palace and says, "Hey, you might want to reconsider your offer because I'm making you, or might want to consider your response to my offer because I'm making you an offer that you really can't refuse, or else I'll blow up your building." Okay. So, anyways, this is pretty much putting the Tokugawa shogunate into pressure, and they open up trade and start the negotiations with the Americans. Well, you know what's going to happen once the Europeans see this? They're going to want to do that, and so tons of other European groups start to move in and to do more trade with Japan and try to push them into a situation where they could get nice treaties. Same thing that happened in China. Special treaties, ours better, and you can't charge us tariffs, so that we can sell products cheap and then get credit, and you don't get any taxes coming in from them. This causes the people in Japan to get more angry towards the Tokugawa shogunate who is running the empire, even though there is an emperor. Okay, and now it starts a rallying point, and the emperor is going to be at the focal point. They're going to carry him into or back into power. He's technically the emperor, but we know that he's really not the group in charge. So he's a puppet type government. Well, that's going to change quickly with all the pressure. So the fact that Japan had bad harvests, bad conditions, people were in disarray, constant rebellion, and then add the fact that the Tokugawa are beaten up by the Europeans or the Americans, it looks bad, and now the Japanese people want to change. Then starts the Meiji Restoration. This is ultra important. It shows up in quite a few things. I've seen it before. So this is essentially getting rid of the Tokugawa, reinstalling the emperor, and then taking control of Japan, and then speeding it up towards Western technology very, very quickly. So they're a prime example of the fact that it could have been done another way, as opposed to kind of the not so successful attempts that took place in the Ottoman, Russian, and Chinese empires. So this guy named Mutsuhito, he's the emperor. He's a very young emperor when he takes over. He's going to be the leading force to reinvigorate and regrow Japan and make them a powerful force, and they want to catch up to the West. So, the motto is "Rich country, strong army," and he's the one that sends tons of people across the world, in particular to Western Europe and the United States, to go learn and see what they got, both industry, technology, and political-wise, and bring that back to Japan, and then they're going to add their twist to it. The Japanese love to copy. They say they love to copy things, but improve on it. In other words, they take a look at the stuff and then go, let's give it a Japanese twist and make it even better. So they're good at that, and they do that with the technology and much of the political images that they see. So Meiji Restoration, led by two guys, Yukichi and Hirobumi. Hirobumi's quite significant in the thing. Yukichi travels to the U.S. and other places. Hirobumi travels to mainly Europe. He might have gotten to the U.S., but what I know of him is he traveled to Europe and was checking out their legal systems and other ideas. Yukichi was more focused on the industrial improvements, but also with a look at what the politics were like. So they argue for the adoption of Western legal proceedings. In other words, kind of like the Ottomans set up the courts, Western-style courts. They set them up kind of like that, as opposed to in the past, the samurai was the court for the daimyo. They would go out and regulate things and chop people's heads off for doing this stuff. The Meiji Restoration completely changes the social structure in Japan. It eliminates the samurai and the daimyo. No longer are they actually significant groups in the mix. Okay, they're going to be reduced to lower levels. They're not going to have the status. Some will maintain kind of a noble class or an aristocratic class because they were at the right place at the right time, but most of them kind of lose their power. The Meiji restorations also bring in tax reform in the form of payment will be in cash, no longer taken in kind. In the past, they took the harvest. Okay, you had to pay a portion of your harvest. Well, that was always subject to good harvest, bad harvest, and then they couldn't anticipate how much money they were going to get. Now, with the new cash payment, you have to sell your stuff and you have to pay whatever the rate is. It's not dependent upon the harvest. So now the government has a better plan as to how much cash is coming in, so they can plan accordingly and use that as a basis of their building. Okay. Within the social structure, remember that the samurai, the warrior class, were very elite, kind of like knights in the area. Well, they're gone because they've been replaced with mercenary armies. There's a big difference between handling a sword and shooting a gun. Shooting a gun doesn't take much experience. Sword is a lifetime of experience and training, and no longer are the samurai as needed because a gun is much more effective than a sword now. This leads us to our constitutional government that's going to be set up. Oh wait, let me go back real quick. I forgot to tell you. As the Meiji Restoration takes place, there's a big group of conservatives who don't want this change. And so they fight against it. And for the record, you can see the Tom Cruise, The Last Samurai movie, where Tom Cruise and his group, who are trying to keep the old conservative waves, they get crushed by guns because guns are pretty good at killing people, much more so than a sword. Anyways, back to our constitutional government. In 1889, they set up this constitutional government. That's what promulgated means. It means just set up, getting going. Okay, but keep in mind, even though it's a constitutional government, it's not like revolutionary. When Murahito sends those people out, they come back and tell him and stuff, and he's not dumb. Okay? he wants the image of constitutional government, but he doesn't want to really have a constitutional government because he's the emperor. He has a lot of powers. He's not going to give all that up. What he does create is a constitutional monarchy, which does limit the power of the monarchy to some extent, but it still keeps a very powerful monarch. Unlike other constitutional monarchs where the king has to work with Congress or Parliament or something like that, the king has a lot of power, so the emperor has a lot more influence on what can happen, and he wants it this way. What does come out of it is a limited government or limited representational government, but only 5% of the people are voting. So, it's the elites, it's the people of wealth, it's people who have status who really control the thing, and 5% of the population. I wouldn't really call that a democracy. Okay, and then there's going to be mass economic reforms, and these are the things that are going to really get Japan going. They're going to industrialize very quickly with like crazy zealot adherence to improving and catching up. Dramatic improvements in literacy rates, education for the people in the area, and then the way that the business started out is the government started the business and gets it going and runs it, and then they sell it off to a family. That family pays for the business to the government. The government gets the money, and then the family controls it. And they've set up these things called zaibatsus, which are kind of like monopolies, in that a family owns or controls a large industry, or a couple families control or own a large industry, and this is how they got it going. The government takes the big risk, gets it going, and then they fork it over to someone, and those people pay the government for it, so the government gets something out of it, but it ends up being controlled by a small group of families. So they're setting up a very wealthy, very, very wealthy aristocratic families. Okay, and hey, that's it. Well, anyways, Japan is now caught up. And what happens next is Japan is on the precipice of being a top dominant group. They get in a battle with. Sorry, I don't have a slide for this. I should have it. Oh wait, I can pause it. Okay, here's the missing slide. So, anyways, Japan is a rising world power. Had some issues. First of all, to pay for all the efforts to modernize, they had to industrialize really quickly, so they had to get the money somehow. So they added this massive land tax on the peasants and the local and the low farmers, which caused quite a bit of unrest because they had to pay this massive tax, and the tax was going to benefit the industry. This is what Japan wanted to pay for. They wanted to industrialize very quickly. This causes tons of peasant unrest and revolt. The revolts are quickly put down by the army and the police forces, and then some of this spreads into the urban centers where the workers have gone to because they're unhappy with the situation. They don't like it. There's some revolt and some unrest in the areas, and then they also the government goes very quickly to make it clear that they will not have any unions. Unions are bad. They don't want the workers organizing to slow down industry because that would stop things. Okay. The end result is at this cost, Japan becomes quite hip and modern, and definitely the dominant group in East Asia, so much so that they're able to renegotiate their trade treaties that they had earlier been forced to sign, backed by the Americans and the British and some other groups, and they're able to end the extraterritoriality process. So that looks good for them. And then they even sign a equal power alliance with Great Britain. It's not so much a military alliance; it's just that we will treat each other with respect and have be trading partners. And then Japan itself goes to the point to becoming a imperializing power. So they're not the West, but they're the East, and they're going to be one of the dominant groups in East Asia, and they're going to pressure other groups for trying to get control. So in 1894-95, they get a war with China. They get in a war with China, and they take over a big chunk of it. So they're going to be controlling parts of it. They also took over Korea and Manchuria later on, and then in 1904-1905, they get in a fight with Russia, and here's the big deal is Russia's a European group. They think they're going to dominate, and they get their butts kicked by the Japanese. Russia looks bad. Japan looks great. And then people around the world are kind of, holy smoke, hey, Japan is kind of for real. They just took out a European power. So it ends this theory that the Europeans are going to be the dominant group, and while the rest of East Asia is going to be the subservient group. Japan industrialized, they caught up, and they're equal on par with these groups. Alright, hey, that's it. Good luck.